If that's your Ferrari, I'll quit!
Officer Dale Rusk barked, loud enough for every porch on Mercy Street to hear. Elijah Grant stood with his palms pressed against the red hood, the metal warm beneath his fingers, the cuffs already cutting into his wrists.
A man shows up here driving a car worth more than this block and expects me to believe it?
Rusk laughed, dangling Elijah's keys like stolen evidence. He shoved Elijah harder against the Ferrari, close enough for Elijah to smell stale coffee and contempt on his breath. Elijah's jaw tightened, yet he said nothing. Behind his silence was the kind of restraint Rusk mistook for fear, a steady calm forged by years of injustice. Rusk did not know the man he was humiliating owned the Ferrari, the building, and the evidence that could end his badge. Before continuing, comment where in the world you are watching from and make sure to subscribe because tomorrow's story is one you can't miss. The Ferrari's engine purred as Elijah Grant eased it to the curb in front of Gloria Bellamy's brick home. The car's bright red color stood out against the weathered houses of Mercy Street like a cardinal among sparrows. Elijah adjusted his crisp green suit before stepping out. The suit wasn't for show. It had been Naomi's favorite color on him. "That boy still dresses like he's going to Sunday service," he heard someone say, and spotted Mrs. Watson peering from her window next door. Elijah smiled and gave her a polite wave. His smile faded when he saw the bright orange paper stuck to Gloria's front door. Another violation notice. Third one this month. Elijah strode purposefully toward the porch steps, his polished shoes crunching on the gravel path. Before his foot touched the first step, blue and red lights flashed in his peripheral vision, reflecting off the windows of nearby homes. A police cruiser had pulled up behind his Ferrari, lights spinning but no siren. Officer Dale Rusk emerged, adjusting his belt with a deliberate slowness that Elijah recognized all too well. The posturing of a man who enjoyed making others wait. "Afternoon, officer," Elijah called, keeping his voice steady and respectful. Rusk approached with his hand resting on his holster. "Want to tell me what you're doing in a car like that in this neighborhood?" Elijah felt the familiar weight settle in his chest, the one that appeared whenever he had to explain himself, prove himself, justify his existence in spaces where others moved freely. "I'm visiting Ms. Bellamy," he replied, gesturing toward the house. "I grew up not far from here." "License and registration," Rusk demanded, his eyes narrowing. "That vehicle been reported?" "No, sir, it hasn't. The car is mine." Elijah reached slowly for his wallet. "Registration's in the glove compartment," he added, moving toward the passenger door. "Stop right there." Rusk's voice hardened. "Step away from the vehicle." Doors opened up and down the street. Neighbors emerged onto porches and sidewalks, watching silently. Someone held up a phone, recording. "Officer, I'm just getting the registration like you asked," Elijah explained, hands visible. "I didn't tell you to open that car," Rusk snapped. "For all I know, you've got a weapon in there." The front door of Gloria's house swung open. Gloria Bellamy stood in the doorway, all 5'3" of her radiating indignation. "Dale Rusk, what in God's name are you doing?" she demanded, making her way down her steps with surprising quickness for a woman of 72. "Stay back, Ms. Bellamy. Police business," Rusk called without looking at her. "Police foolishness is what it is." Gloria planted herself at the edge of her yard. "That boy grew up 3 doors down. You know exactly who he is." Rusk ignored her, focusing on Elijah. "Hands on the hood, sir." Elijah complied, placing his palms flat against the warm metal of his Ferrari. The car Naomi had insisted he buy before she got sick. "Something to make you smile when life gets heavy," she'd said. "Officer," Elijah said quietly, "if you'll just let me show you." "You being evasive." Rusk cut him off. "You been drinking today?" "No, sir, because I'm getting a lot of attitude, and I smell alcohol." Elijah knew the lie for what it was. He hadn't touched a drop in years. Not since Naomi. "That's a damn lie," Gloria called out. More phones appeared in neighbors' hands. "This is harassment. One more word, and you're interfering with an officer, Ms. Bellamy," Rusk warned. "What crime am I suspected of committing, Officer Rusk?" Elijah asked, his voice calm despite the anger building in his chest. "Turn around," Rusk ordered, ignoring the question. "Hands behind your back." "Officer, you are making a mistake," Elijah said, still controlled but firm. Rusk grabbed Elijah's wrist, twisting it as he spun him around. The movement was unnecessarily rough, designed to provoke resistance. Elijah didn't give him the satisfaction. Rusk smirked, then pointed at the Ferrari and laughed loudly enough for the gathering crowd to hear. "If that's your Ferrari, I'll quit," he announced mockingly. The handcuffs snapped cold and tight around Elijah's wrists. Too tight, biting into his skin. A deliberate discomfort. The neighborhood fell into stunned silence. No one moved, except to keep recording. Mrs. Watson covered her mouth with her hand. Mr. Townsend, a retired postal worker, shook his head slowly. Gloria stood trembling with rage, her eyes filled with tears of frustration. Elijah stood tall despite the humiliation, despite the cuffs cutting into his flesh. He stared straight ahead, his face a carefully composed mask that revealed nothing of the storm inside him. The Ferrari gleamed in the afternoon sun as Rusk pushed Elijah against it, treating him like a common criminal in front of the very community that had watched him grow up. Officer Rusk patted Elijah down with rough, invasive movements. His hands slapped against Elijah's sides and legs with unnecessary force. A younger officer stood nearby, shifting his weight from one foot to another, his name badge reading Brooks. "Nothing in the pockets but a wallet and keys," Rusk announced, pulling them out and dangling the Ferrari key fob for everyone to see. "Well, look at that. A fancy key to go with the fancy story." "It's mine," Elijah said quietly. "As I've been trying to tell you." Rusk gave another cruel chuckle, but this time the laughter sounded thinner, meaner, more performative. He lifted the key fob toward the watching neighbors like it was evidence in a trial. "You hear that?" Rusk called out. "He wants us all to believe he rolled up here in a car worth more than most houses on this block, and we're supposed to just nod along." Officer Brooks looked down at his shoes, clearly uncomfortable with the spectacle his partner was creating. "The registration is in the glove compartment," Elijah said, his voice steady despite the handcuffs digging into his wrists. "You're welcome to check it." Rusk leaned close enough for Elijah to smell the stale coffee on his breath. "Oh, I'll check it," he said. "But first, we're going to find out what else you're hiding behind that calm little act." "Oh, I will," Rusk said. "But first, let's make sure you don't have anything else hidden away." He forced Elijah to lean forward against the hood of the Ferrari. The metal felt warm against Elijah's chest. The position was deliberately humiliating, displayed like a criminal against his own car, while neighbors recorded the scene on their phones. Gloria stepped off her porch, her spine straight despite her 72 years. "This has gone far enough, Dale Rusk. You've known this man since he was a child." "Step back, Ms. Bellamy," Rusk warned, not even turning to face her. "Unless you want a citation for interfering with police business." "Interfering with foolishness is what I'd be doing," Gloria shot back. But she stopped at the edge of her yard, hands trembling with rage. Brooks finally spoke up, though his voice came out softer than he probably intended. "Should I run the plates, sir?" "Already called it in," Rusk said, opening the driver's door of the Ferrari. "Dispatch says there might be an alert out for a vehicle matching this description." "What's the alert specifically for?" Elijah asked. "Red sports car, possibly stolen from Highland Park area," Rusk said smugly. "A Ferrari 812 GTS is not just a red sports car," Elijah pointed out. And Highland Park is 40 miles from here. You seem to know a lot about stolen vehicles, Rusk said, rifling through the glove compartment. Elijah took a slow, deep breath. I'd like your badge number, Officer Rusk. And yours as well, Officer Brooks. Brooks looked startled at being addressed directly. You want my badge number? Rusk laughed again, pulling out the vehicle registration. You'll have plenty of time to memorize it on the way to the station. He glanced at the registration, his expression flickering for just a moment before hardening again. He quickly stuffed the paper into his pocket. What are the charges? Elijah asked calmly. Obstruction of justice, for starters, Rusk said, his voice rising. Possibly resisting arrest without violence. I haven't resisted anything, Elijah pointed out. Your attitude is resistance enough, Rusk snapped, clearly frustrated by Elijah's composure. And we'll see what else comes up when we get to the station. More neighbors had gathered now. Mrs. Watson from 2 doors down was openly weeping. Mr. Townsend stood with his arms folded, shaking his head slowly. At least a dozen phones were recording everything. Dale, this isn't right, someone called from across the street. You know it isn't. Anyone interfering will be cited, Rusk announced to the crowd. Officer Brooks, secure the vehicle. We'll have it towed for evidence. Brooks hesitated. Don't we need a warrant for probable cause? Rusk cut him off. Now do as I say. Rusk grabbed Elijah's arm and marched him toward the patrol car. Elijah didn't resist, but he didn't lower his head either. He walked with as much dignity as the handcuffs would allow. Call Lena Price, Elijah called to Gloria as he passed. Her number is in my phone. You'll get your phone call at the station, Rusk said, shoving Elijah's head down as he pushed him into the back seat of the cruiser. Through the window, Elijah watched Gloria clutch her porch railing, her face a mixture of fury and fear. The Ferrari sat abandoned on Mercy Street, gleaming defiantly in the afternoon sun, as Officer Brooks stood awkwardly beside it, avoiding the stares of the neighbors. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as Elijah sat on a hard metal bench at the precinct booking desk. His wrists ached from the too tight cuffs that Officer Rusk had deliberately fastened with extra force. The station hummed with activity, phones ringing, keyboards clicking, officers moving between desks with coffee cups and file folders. Rusk stood a few feet away, leaning against a filing cabinet with a smirk on his face. He was performing for a small audience of 2 other officers. So there he is, standing next to this Ferrari like he owns it, Rusk said, chuckling. Wearing this fancy green suit in the middle of Mercy Street. Like we're all supposed to believe that's his car. The officers laughed on cue. One of them glanced at Elijah with undisguised contempt. Big dreams and borrowed cars, Rusk continued. Tale as old as time. Officer Brooks stood apart from the group, fidgeting with his notepad and avoiding eye contact with everyone. The desk sergeant, a heavy-set man with salt and pepper hair, typed Elijah's information into the computer system. Registration check on the Ferrari is coming back now, he announced. Rusk sauntered over. Let me guess. Reported stolen last week? The sergeant squinted at his screen. No. Vehicle is registered to Elijah Grant. Address matches driver's license. He looked up with surprise. It's his car. A hush fell over the room. Several officers turned to stare at Elijah, then at Rusk. Rusk's face reddened. That doesn't change the obstruction charge. He was aggressive and uncooperative during a legitimate stop. I was neither aggressive nor uncooperative, Elijah said calmly. And I believe Officer Brooks knows that. All eyes turned to Brooks, who suddenly became intensely interested in his shoes. Registration could be faked, Rusk insisted. Run a deeper check. The desk sergeant tapped more keys. His eyebrows shot up. Mr. Grant is the owner of Grant Renewable Infrastructure, Inc. And, he paused, looking directly at Rusk, he's the owner of the old Mercy Street Community Center building. The one where tonight's redevelopment hearing is being held? The room fell silent again, this time with a different quality. The quiet of people realizing a serious mistake had been made. "That's impossible," Rusk muttered. "His foundation purchased it last year," the sergeant continued. "And according to this press release, the Grant Foundation is scheduled to announce a senior housing assistance program at tonight's meeting." Rusk's smirk had completely vanished. He was still interfering with— "I'd like my phone call now," Elijah interrupted. The desk sergeant nodded and slid a desk phone toward him. Elijah dialed Lena Price's number from memory. When she answered, he spoke clearly enough for everyone to hear. "Lena, it's Elijah Grant. I've been arrested by Officer Dale Rusk at the North Precinct on charges of obstruction and resisting arrest without violence. The Ferrari has been impounded as evidence. Yes, that Officer Rusk. I'll wait here." He hung up and stared directly at Rusk. "My attorney will be here shortly." Heavy footsteps approached from the hallway, and Captain Harold Vance entered the room. Tall and imposing in his crisp uniform, Vance surveyed the scene with practiced neutrality. "What's the situation here?" he asked, his voice smooth and controlled. Rusk moved quickly to Vance's side, speaking in hushed tones. Elijah couldn't hear everything, but he caught fragments. "Suspicious behavior, and attitude problem, and just doing my job." Vance nodded, his face betraying nothing. He glanced at Elijah, then back to Rusk. The look that passed between them told Elijah everything he needed to know. The department would close ranks. Rusk stepped away from Vance, moving toward the coffee machine. As he passed another officer, Elijah clearly heard him mutter, "He was at Bellamy's house. Same old lady from the list." The list. Elijah committed the phrase to memory. Vance approached him with a professional smile that never reached his eyes. "Mr. Grant, there appears to have been a misunderstanding. We'll be processing your release immediately." "And my car?" Elijah asked. "We'll have it returned to you, of course," Vance said. "These things happen in the interest of public safety." "These things," Elijah repeated slowly. "You mean false arrests?" Vance's smile tightened. "The paperwork will show this was a brief investigative detention, not an arrest. No charges will be filed." 30 minutes later, Elijah walked out of the precinct into the late afternoon sun. No apology had been offered. His personal items had been returned in a plastic bag, like he was collecting trash. The red marks on his wrists from the handcuffs had deepened to purple. Lena Price waited by her car, a tall black woman in her late 40s, with close-cropped hair and a tailored pantsuit. Her expression was a controlled fury as she examined the marks on Elijah's wrists. "I want their badges," she said flatly. "I heard something else in there," Elijah replied. "Something about a list with Gloria's name on it." He looked back at the station. This wasn't just about me and that car. The sun hung low in the sky, painting Mercy Street in long shadows as Lena's sedan pulled away from the precinct. Elijah sat quietly in the passenger seat, rubbing his wrists where the handcuffs had left angry red marks. "We can file for wrongful detention," Lena said, her eyes fixed on the road. "Rusk had no probable cause. The Ferrari wasn't even close to matching any stolen vehicle report." Elijah nodded but seemed distracted. "There's something bigger happening. When I was leaving, I heard Rusk say something about Gloria being on the list." "What list?" Lena's hands tightened on the steering wheel. "That's what we need to find out," Elijah said. The way he said it, like it was something they all knew about, something organized. They turned onto Fifth Avenue, where the impound lot stood behind a chain-link fence. The Ferrari looked out of place among the dented sedans and abandoned trucks. "I'll wait," Lena said, as Elijah got out. 20 minutes and several $100s later, Elijah drove his car out of the impound lot, following Lena through the neighborhood streets. They passed rows of modest homes with deep porches, some freshly painted, others showing their age. Elijah knew every block. He'd grown up here, played here, left here, and now returned as both a stranger and a son. They pulled up to a brick townhouse with green shutters on a quiet side street. Elijah's temporary home since returning to the city after Naomi's death. "I need 15 minutes," he told Lena as they walked inside. "There's something I need to check." The townhouse was sparsely furnished. A couch, a dining table, a few lamps, not much else. Elijah hadn't bothered making it feel like home. He headed straight for the second bedroom he used as an office, where cardboard boxes lined one wall. Naomi's boxes, her files, her work. His throat tightened as he knelt beside them. A year after her death, and still he could smell her perfume when he opened them. "Elijah?" Lena stood in the doorway, watching him with concern. "Naomi was working on something before the accident," he said, pulling out folders. "Housing cases. Elderly residents." She mentioned Gloria a few times. Elijah spread the files across the floor. Lena knelt beside him, helping sort through the papers. There were complaint forms, handwritten notes, maps of the neighborhood with certain blocks highlighted. "Here," Lena said, holding up a folder labeled Mercy Street Senior Residence. Inside were profiles of a dozen elderly homeowners. Gloria Bellamy's information was on top, her address circled in bright red ink. Next to it, Naomi had written, "Third visit from Officer R. No actual violation." "Look at this," Elijah said, finding a yellow legal pad. Naomi's handwriting covered the pages with observations and questions. "Code violations spike after developer inquiry. Same officer responds to complaints. Pattern, citation, police visit, then offer to buy. Who coordinates the timing?" Elijah's hands trembled slightly as he turned the pages. She knew. Naomi was tracking this pattern before she died. "The timing," Lena said quietly. 3 houses on Gloria's block sold for below market last year, all after code violations. Elijah found a folder of newspaper clippings about a redevelopment initiative sponsored by Councilwoman Nora Delaney. The same initiative being discussed at tonight's community meeting. "It's not just about racism or a cop who couldn't believe I owned that car," Elijah said, his voice hardening. "Rusk was already on Gloria's street for a reason. My showing up there disrupted something they've been doing for months." Lena gathered several key documents. Naomi was building a case. She thought the police were helping pressure people to sell. "And then she died," Elijah said quietly. "And I was too broken to notice what was happening right in front of me." He pulled out a photo tucked into one of the folders, Naomi standing on Gloria's porch, her arm around the older woman's shoulders. Both were smiling. On the back, Naomi had written, "We protect our elders, or we lose our soul." Elijah stared at his wife's handwriting, feeling a familiar ache in his chest, but now mingled with something else. Purpose, clarity. "The community center meeting starts in 30 minutes, Lena said, checking her watch. Elijah gathered the most important documents and slid them into his leather briefcase. He touched the photo of Naomi one last time before adding it to the case. "I was supposed to announce the senior housing fund tonight," he said, rising to his feet. "Now it seems even more necessary than I thought." He straightened his green suit jacket, the same one he'd been wearing during his arrest, the same color Naomi had loved. "Ready?" Lena asked. Elijah nodded, picking up his briefcase. The papers inside weren't just files now. They were Naomi's unfinished work, her legacy. And somehow, his humiliation at Rusk's hands had given him the key to continuing what she'd started. "Let's go," he said. The old Mercy Street Community Center had seen better days. Water stains marked the ceiling tiles, and the wooden floor creaked under every footstep. But tonight, the main meeting room was packed. Neighbors filled every folding chair, stood against walls, and spilled into the hallway. The air felt heavy with tension. Elijah paused at the entrance, adjusting his green suit jacket to cover the raw marks on his wrists where Rusk's handcuffs had dug into his skin. It hadn't been enough time for bruises to fully form, but the red welts told their story. Several residents nodded at him with quiet respect. Others whispered behind their hands. "You okay?" Lena asked quietly. Elijah gave a short nod. "I'm better than okay." "I'm ready." He moved toward the front, where a small table held a microphone and pitcher of water. Councilwoman Nora Delaney sat there in a tailored gray suit, her smile professional as she chatted with two men in expensive ties, representatives from Eastland Development Group. They stopped talking when Elijah approached. "Mr. Grant," Delaney said, her voice perfectly balanced between warmth and formality. "I heard about your unfortunate misunderstanding with Officer Rusk. I do hope everything has been resolved satisfactorily." "Nothing about false arrest is satisfactory, Councilwoman," Elijah replied, his voice low but firm. Delaney's smile tightened. "Well, we're here to talk about progress tonight, not problems." At 7 o'clock, Delaney called the meeting to order. She spoke about revitalization and urban renewal, while showing slides of gleaming apartment complexes and landscaped walkways. Words like community and future peppered her speech, but Elijah noticed she never once mentioned the people currently living in the neighborhood. When his turn came to speak, Elijah approached the microphone. The residents quieted, many leaning forward in their chairs. "My foundation was planning to announce something tonight," he began, his deep voice filling the room. "Recent events have only strengthened my resolve." He made brief eye contact with faces he recognized. Mrs. Jenkins, who taught him in 3rd grade, Reverend Wallace, who had buried his parents, Gloria, who sat in the 3rd row clutching a white envelope. Effective immediately, the Grant Foundation is doubling our emergency repair fund for senior homeowners on Mercy Street. Any resident over 65 facing code violations can apply for assistance. He paused as applause rippled through the room. "These are homes, not just properties. These are neighbors, not obstacles." Gloria dabbed at her eyes with a tissue. Others nodded vigorously or clasped hands. Delaney's smile had vanished completely. She whispered something to the developer beside her, then took back the microphone. "That's certainly generous, Mr. Grant," she said. "However, we must address urgent safety concerns that private grants may not adequately resolve. That's why I'm introducing an emergency redevelopment proposal tonight." She clicked to a new slide, showing a legal document. "This measure creates an expedited review process for properties with unresolved code violations. Owners will have 30 days to bring properties into full compliance, after which the city can begin condemnation proceedings for public safety." A heavy silence fell over the room, broken only by a few gasps. "30 days?" Mrs. Jenkins called out. "To fix everything? This is highway robbery," someone shouted from the back. Elijah scanned the crowd and noticed Captain Harold Vance standing near the exit, arms folded across his chest, watching the scene unfold with calculated interest. Their eyes met briefly before Vance looked away. Gloria raised a trembling hand, and Delaney reluctantly acknowledged her. "I received this today," Gloria said, holding up her envelope. "It says I need a new roof, new porch supports, and electrical updates. $20,000 of work. In 30 days." Her voice shook with anger. "I worked 40 years as a nurse. I've owned that house for 35 years. How am I supposed to do all this in a month?" Others began standing, holding similar envelopes. "Mine came yesterday. Same violations, word for word. They're trying to steal our homes." Delaney tapped the microphone. "Please, everyone, This is about safety, not ownership changes. If you can't afford repairs, there are always willing buyers. Like the men sitting next to you, Elijah interrupted, stepping back to the front. The room erupted in angry voices. Elijah raised his hands for quiet. I promise everyone in this room, he said, his voice steady and sure. The 30-day clock stops now. We will fight this. Lena moved quietly through the crowd, notepad in hand, collecting violation notices from residents who reached out to her. She made her way row by row, documenting each case, building their defense. Mr. Grant doesn't speak for the city council, Delaney said sharply. No, Elijah replied. I speak for Mercy Street, and we're not going anywhere. The night after the heated community meeting, Gloria barely slept. By dawn, she was already at her kitchen table, organizing violation notices with shaking hands. The $20,000 estimate for repairs might as well have been $20 million. At 7 o'clock sharp, her doorbell rang. Elijah stood on her porch, wearing a simple button-down shirt instead of yesterday's suit. Beside him, Lena Price balanced a leather portfolio and digital recorder. Did you sleep at all? Gloria asked, noticing the shadows under Elijah's eyes. Not much, he admitted, but we don't have time to waste. Inside Gloria's living room, they spread a neighborhood map across her coffee table. Red circles marked homes with violation notices. We need to document everything, Lena explained, checking her recorder. Every notice, every police visit, every buyout offer. Dates, times, names. We'll go door to door, Elijah added. People will talk to you, Gloria. They trust you. Gloria nodded firmly. Then, let's get walking. Their first stop was 3 doors down at Albert Keene's small brick home. The 74-year-old widower answered in a cardigan despite the warm morning. His lawn was neatly trimmed, his walkway recently swept. Mr. Keene, we need to talk about your violation notices, Gloria said gently. Albert hesitated, eyeing Lena's recorder with suspicion. I don't like trouble. This isn't about making trouble, Elijah assured him. It's about stopping it. Inside, Albert's home was spotless but frozen in time. Family photos from decades past, furniture well-maintained but aged. He retrieved a folder from beneath his recliner. Started last month, he explained, spreading out official-looking papers. First, it was the gutters. I fixed those. Then it was the porch railing. Lena examined the notice. $3,800 for a railing replacement. That's outrageous. Albert nodded sadly. Man from the city said it wasn't up to code. But I built that railing myself 20 years ago. It's solid oak. Elijah tested the railing. It didn't budge. Did anyone offer to buy your house after the violations? 3 different people, Albert confirmed. Last one came 2 days ago. Offered cash, said I should take it before the city condemned the place. Lena recorded every detail while Gloria held the old man's hand. This was where Margaret and I raised our children, Albert said, voice cracking. I can't just leave. By mid-morning, they'd visited 6 more homes. The pattern was unmistakable. Mavis Rowe, a 69-year-old retired schoolteacher, invited them into her immaculate living room. Unlike Albert, she had evidence meticulously organized in labeled folders. Once a teacher, always a teacher, she explained with dignity. I document everything. Mavis showed them a calendar marking police visits. Officer Rusk parked outside twice last week, just sitting there with his lights off until nearly midnight. After you refused to sell? Lena asked. Exactly. The developer called Monday offering $120,000. Mavis laughed bitterly. This house is worth twice that. My husband and I paid it off 15 years ago. Elijah looked at the wall of family photos. What did Rusk say when he came to your door? Claimed there were reports of suspicious activity. But he was looking at my house, not for criminals. Mavis's voice hardened. I taught for 35 years. I know intimidation when I see it. By late afternoon, they had visited 14 homes. Lena spread the documents across Gloria's dining table, organizing them chronologically. Look at the timeline, she said, pointing. Code violations increased 300% after Delaney's redevelopment proposal went to committee. These aren't random inspections. Gloria sank into a chair. They're trying to force us all out at once. Elijah stepped onto Gloria's porch, measuring the awning. I'm installing a security camera. If Rusk shows up again, we'll have it recorded. He's been here before, Gloria admitted quietly. 2 nights last week. Said he was doing welfare checks on seniors. At 11 p.m., Elijah asked, mounting a small black camera beneath the porch light. Exactly. Just standing there, flashlight in my face, asking if I'd considered my options. Gloria shuddered. I've never been so scared in my own home. As evening approached, Elijah connected the camera to Gloria's Wi-Fi. This will send footage directly to a secure cloud account. If anyone comes, don't answer unless you know them. I'm not hiding in my own house, Gloria insisted. Not hiding, Lena corrected. Gathering evidence. Elijah finished the installation as sunset painted Mercy Street in amber light. Call me immediately if anything happens, he told Gloria. Day or night. As he descended Gloria's porch steps, a white police cruiser rolled slowly down Mercy Street. Officer Rusk was behind the wheel, driving deliberately below the speed limit. He didn't stop or flash his lights, just cruised past, eyes fixed on Elijah and Gloria's porch. Elijah stood perfectly still, watching the patrol car continue down the block before turning the corner. The camera's running, he said quietly to Gloria. Let him come. Gloria sat in her armchair, an open photo album across her lap. The pictures showed a younger version of herself standing proudly beside her late husband in front of the very same house. 40 years earlier. The mortgage burning party. Their faces beaming with accomplishment after 20 years of payments. She traced her finger over her husband's smile. We did it, Charles, she whispered. Nobody's taking our home. The quiet moment shattered when bright headlights swept across her living room curtains, flooding the space with harsh white light. Gloria stiffened. A car door slammed outside. Heavy footsteps thumped up her porch steps, followed by 3 loud, aggressive knocks that seemed designed to intimidate rather than announce. Gloria set the album aside and stood slowly, her knees protesting. She didn't need to check who it was. The knocking pattern alone, authoritative, demanding, told her everything. The pounding came again, harder this time. Police! Open up, Mrs. Bellamy! Gloria smoothed her house dress, took a steadying breath, and opened the door just enough to peer through. Officer Rusk stood on her porch, flashlight in hand despite the porch light being on. He aimed the beam directly at her face. Can I help you, officer? Gloria asked, squinting against the glare. Got a noise complaint about this address, Rusk said, his tone flat and unconvincing. Gloria didn't blink. A noise complaint? I've been sitting alone looking at old photographs. Mind if I step in and check things out? Without waiting for permission, Rusk pushed the door wider and moved onto her porch. I do mind, Gloria said, but he was already past her. The house sat in perfect silence except for the ticking of her grandfather clock in the hallway. No television, no radio, nothing that could possibly disturb neighbors. Rusk made a show of looking around. Funny thing about these old houses, he said, tapping his flashlight against his palm. They're not up to code anymore. City's concerned about safety. My house is just fine, Gloria replied, standing her ground. Been here 52 years without incident. Rusk's false smile disappeared. Look, Mrs. Bellamy, you should know the developer's offer isn't going to improve. 3 other homeowners on this block already sold. Smart ones always go first. Is this why you're really here? To pressure me into selling my home? I'm here because I care about this neighborhood, Rusk said, his voice hardening. The city will handle things the hard way if necessary. Condemnation proceedings aren't pleasant. Gloria's heart pounded, but decades of working as a nurse had taught her never to show fear. My home is not for sale. Not to developers, not to the city, not to anyone. Rusk stepped closer. You're making a mistake. The only mistake was opening my door to you without a witness present, Gloria said. Rusk's eyes darted to the corner of the porch ceiling where Elijah's camera was mounted. His expression darkened. What's this? He growled, moving toward it. Security camera, Gloria said. My property. My right. This is interference with police activity, Rusk snapped. He raised his heavy flashlight and struck the camera with a sickening crack. Plastic and electronic components scattered across Gloria's porch. Gloria gasped. That's destruction of private property. That's a public safety violation, Rusk countered, pointing his flashlight back in her face. Electronic devices improperly installed create fire hazards. He leaned in, voice dropping to a menacing whisper. Final warning, Mrs. Bellamy. Take the money while it's still being offered. Gloria's hands trembled, but her voice remained steady. Get off my porch, officer. Now. Rusk smiled coldly. Have it your way. He stepped back, crushing camera pieces under his boot deliberately. Expect a citation for the improper electronic installation, and maybe a few more things we find wrong next inspection. Gloria watched, heart hammering in her chest, as Rusk walked back to his patrol car. She waited until his taillights disappeared around the corner before letting her brave facade crumble. Her hands shook violently as she reached for her phone and pressed Elijah's number. He was here, she said when Elijah answered. Rusk, he smashed your camera. 20 minutes later, Elijah's Ferrari purred to a stop in front of Gloria's house. He and Lena hurried up the porch steps where Gloria waited, still shaken but composed. Are you all right? Elijah asked, examining the destroyed camera. I'm angry, not hurt, Gloria said. He threatened me, said I should take the money while it's still being offered. Lena carefully collected pieces of the broken camera. This is blatant intimidation. He doesn't know about the second camera, Elijah said quietly, reaching up to the porch light fixture. He carefully removed the decorative cover to reveal a tiny lens built into what appeared to be a normal light fixture. You clever boy, Gloria said with admiration. Elijah connected his phone to the hidden camera's feed and pulled up the footage. The three of them huddled around the screen, watching the entire confrontation in high definition. Rusk's uninvited entry, his threats about condemnation, the deliberate destruction of property. Everything captured with crystal-clear audio. Lena's expression hardened. This is perfect evidence. Elijah's face was a storm of controlled anger as he replayed the moment where Rusk threatened Gloria. This is no longer just suspicion, he said, his voice quiet but fierce. We have him on record abusing his authority and threatening a senior citizen. The morning light streamed through the blinds in Elijah's townhouse as he hunched over his laptop. The footage from Gloria's porch played on the screen. Officer Rusk's threatening posture, his deliberate destruction of property, his thinly veiled threats all captured in high definition. Lena paced behind him, phone to her ear. We need to file this with Internal Affairs, the district attorney, and possibly the FBI Civil Rights Division, she said, hanging up. This is textbook abuse of power. Elijah nodded, typing rapidly. I'm drafting the public complaint now. By tomorrow, everyone will see exactly who Officer Dale Rusk really is. Lena's phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen and frowned. Elijah, you need to see this. She handed him her phone, open to the Mercy Heights Observer website. The headline made his stomach drop. Local police confront aggressive driver in gentrification dispute. Elijah scrolled through the article, his jaw tightening. The piece quoted extensively from Rusk's official police report, describing Elijah as hostile and uncooperative during the Ferrari arrest. It painted Rusk as a professional officer protecting the neighborhood from outside agitators disrupting community improvement efforts. "This is a complete fabrication," Elijah said, his voice tight. "They leaked the report to control the narrative before we could release the footage." "It gets worse," Lena said, pointing to a paragraph near the end that connected Elijah's foundation to radical housing activists who opposed necessary neighborhood improvements. Elijah's phone rang. The caller ID showed one of his foundation's largest donors. "Mr. Grant, we need to discuss recent developments," the donor said without preamble. "Several board members are concerned about the foundation being associated with police confrontations." "The report is false," Elijah said firmly. "I have video evidence." "Perhaps we should pause our contribution until things cool down," the donor interrupted. "We support your mission, but controversy isn't what we signed up for." 2 more calls followed, both donors expressing similar concerns. By noon, Elijah's foundation had lost commitments for nearly $200,000 in funding. "They're trying to isolate us," Lena observed, reviewing notes from each call. "Cut off the money, turn public opinion, and make the residents feel helpless." Elijah drove to Mercy Street, knuckles white on the steering wheel of his modest backup car. He'd left the Ferrari home, unwilling to draw additional attention. Neighbors who had greeted him warmly yesterday now watched cautiously from their windows. The article had done its job. At Gloria's house, he found her sitting on her porch swing, a newspaper folded in her lap. "I see you found their hit piece," he said, taking a seat beside her. Gloria nodded. "They're calling you dangerous now. Yesterday you were their honored guest." Elijah rubbed his temples. "Donors are backing away. People are scared to be associated with me. Baby, they only call you dangerous when you stop being useful," Gloria said, patting his hand. "Yesterday, you were their successful black man. They could put on brochures. Today, you're questioning power, so they need to make you the threat." Her words struck him deep. "I never wanted this fight. None of us did, but here we are. So what now? You gonna let them scare you off with a nasty article?" Elijah's phone buzzed with a text from Lena. "Don't release all the footage yet. Strategic approach needed. Meet me at your place in an hour." When Lena arrived, she laid out her strategy. "We released just enough of the footage to force official attention. Rusk threatening Gloria, but not the part about the property list. Keep our strongest evidence in reserve." "Why not show everything?" Elijah asked. "Because they'll prepare excuses, lose evidence, coordinate stories," Lena explained. "We need them to commit to one lie before we show them the next piece of truth." Elijah's phone buzzed again. "Unknown number. Officer Brooks here. Rusk's report is completely false. You weren't hostile. There's a pressure property list. Need to talk privately." Elijah showed Lena the text. "Could be a trap," she warned. "Or our first witness from inside the system," Elijah countered. He typed back, "How do I know it's you?" The reply came quickly. "I was the officer standing behind Rusk. You asked for my badge number. I was wearing number 4872. You had a scar on your right hand. No one else would know these details." Elijah confirmed the details were accurate. Brooks suggested meeting somewhere private, away from police cameras and patrols. "Behind the community center. Midnight," Elijah typed. "Come alone." "This is risky," Lena cautioned. "So is doing nothing while they take Gloria's home," Elijah replied. "Naomi would have taken the meeting." Lena nodded. "I'll be nearby, just in case." Elijah looked down at his phone as Brooks confirmed, "Midnight. I'll bring proof. Near midnight, behind the Mercy Street Community Center, Elijah and Lena waited beneath a flickering security light. The community center's back lot was empty except for their car, parked in shadow. Wind pushed trash across the cracked pavement. Every passing car made them tense. "He's late," Lena whispered, checking her watch. Elijah nodded. 5 more minutes. Then we leave." The sound of cautious footsteps made them both turn. Officer Nathaniel Brooks appeared at the edge of the light, wearing jeans and a gray hoodie instead of his uniform. His eyes darted nervously from shadow to shadow. "I shouldn't be here," Brooks said, staying near the wall. "If anyone finds out." "But you came?" Elijah said. "Because you know what Rusk did was wrong." Brooks wiped sweat from his forehead despite the cool night. "It wasn't just wrong. It was planned. Rusk had your name before he ever pulled you over." Lena stepped forward. "How do you know that?" "I was in the car when dispatch called," Brooks explained, his voice barely above a whisper. "There was no stolen vehicle report. Rusk just said, 'That's him,' when he saw you at Bellamy's house." Elijah felt a cold certainty settle over him. Gloria's address was marked. Brooks nodded. "Her house, and about 20 others. They call it the holdout list. Residents who won't sell." He pulled a folded paper from his pocket with shaking hands. "This isn't the original. That's locked in Vance's office. But I copied addresses during shift change." "And Captain Vance knows about this?" Lena asked. "Knows about it? He coordinates it." Brooks looked over his shoulder again. "Weekly meetings with someone from the city planning office. They update the list, then Rusk and 2 other officers get assigned to do community checks at those addresses." "Community checks," Elijah repeated bitterly. "You mean harassment. Call it whatever you want. It works. 7 homeowners sold in the last month." Brooks pulled another folded paper from his pocket. "I also have a copy of your arrest report. The real one, before Rusk rewrote it. It shows you were completely cooperative." Before he could hand over the papers, Brooks's phone lit up. He flinched as it vibrated repeatedly in his hand. The screen showed 4 missed calls. His face went pale as he checked the messages. "What is it?" Elijah asked. "Internal affairs," Brooks whispered, suddenly backing away. "They've opened a complaint against me. Filed this evening. Excessive force claim from last week. This isn't random. Someone knows I'm talking to you." "Brooks, wait," Lena said. "We can protect you as a whistleblower." "You don't understand," he said, shoving the papers back into his pocket. "My wife is pregnant. We have a mortgage. They can destroy us." "At least give us the documents," Elijah urged. Brooks shook his head. "They'll know it came from me. The timing would be too obvious." He backed toward the street. "I'll find another way to get them to you. Somewhere they can't track." "When?" Lena pressed. "Soon. I promise. But I need to go now." Brooks turned and hurried toward his car parked a block away. Elijah moved to follow him, but Lena grabbed his arm. "Let him go," she said. "He's scared." They watched Brooks's taillights disappear around the corner. Less than a minute later, a dark sedan with tinted windows cruised slowly past the alley entrance. It made no sound as it passed, but Elijah felt its presence like a physical weight. "We're being watched," he whispered. "Not just watched," Lena said. "They're sending a message." The sedan circled back, passing the alley entrance a second time. Its headlights swept across them briefly before it continued down the street. "How high does this go?" Elijah wondered aloud. "High enough to scare a cop into silence," Lena replied. "High enough to monitor us tonight." They waited until the street seemed clear, then hurried to their car. Lena drove while Elijah watched for followers. They took 3 extra turns and doubled back once, before feeling safe enough to speak again. "Brooks confirmed it," Elijah said. "There's an organized pressure campaign against these homeowners, and it goes up to Captain Vance." "But we still have no proof," Lena reminded him. "Nothing we can take to court or the media." "Brooks will come through," Elijah said, though he wasn't sure he believed it. Maybe, Lena said, but we can't count on that. We need to find our own evidence. Elijah thought of Gloria, Mr. Keene, Ms. Rowe, all the elderly residents who might lose their homes within weeks if they couldn't stop this. Naomi had more, he said suddenly. She must have. She was too thorough not to have backup. By the time Lena dropped him at his townhouse, the eastern sky was showing the first hint of dawn. Elijah went straight to his office where Naomi's remaining boxes waited. He'd only gone through half of them. Kneeling beside the stack, he opened the next one and began sorting through folders, legal pads, and old recordings. Somewhere in these boxes was the proof they needed. The evidence Naomi had been collecting before her death. "Help me find it," he whispered to her memory as the first light of morning crept through his window. Sunlight crept through the blinds of Elijah's home office as dawn broke over the city. He hadn't slept. Naomi's files covered every inch of his desk. Folders, notes, and photographs spilled across the polished wood surface. The soft glow of his laptop illuminated his tired face as he pressed play on another voice recording from Naomi's digital recorder. Interview 17. Naomi's voice filled the quiet room. March 4th, with former Code Inspector Thomas Reynolds. Elijah closed his eyes. Her voice still felt like a knife to his chest. Clear, determined, alive. He hadn't been able to listen to these recordings since her death 14 months ago. Now he couldn't stop. "Mr. Reynolds, you mentioned pressure to flag certain properties. Can you explain?" A nervous male voice responded, "Look, it wasn't official policy, but we knew which streets to focus on. Captain Vance would have officers present during inspections on Mercy Street, Cherry Avenue, and Walnut Row. Never happened in other neighborhoods." Elijah grabbed a notepad, writing "Vance direct involvement" with a thick underline. The recording continued. "Did Councilwoman Delaney ever contact your department directly?" "Not me personally," Reynolds answered, "but my supervisor met with her twice monthly. After those meetings, we'd get lists of priority enforcement properties, always in neighborhoods marked for redevelopment." Elijah's pen froze mid-word. He played the section again, then rifled through more files until he found a folder marked City Connections. Inside was a spreadsheet tracking meetings between code enforcement and Delaney's office. Next to it lay a list of addresses, with Gloria's home circled in red. He clicked on another audio file. Interview 23, April 12th. Subject requested anonymity. Assistant to Paul Sutter, Meridian Development Group. A woman's frightened voice spoke quietly. "Mr. Sutter calls them softening visits. Police show up, make residents nervous. Then we offer cash, always below market value. He says it's just business, but it feels wrong." Elijah's heart pounded as he opened Naomi's digital calendar. He scrolled back through time, through the months after she died, until he reached the week before the accident. There it was, a meeting scheduled with someone named Martin K. City Inspector, 2 days before the crash that took her life. "Oh, Naomi," he whispered, his voice breaking. There was no evidence connecting her death to this investigation. The accident report described a rainy night, a slick road, a truck that crossed the center line. But the timing stabbed at him. She'd been so close to putting it all together. While he'd been lost in grief, people like Gloria were being squeezed out of their homes. The work Naomi had dedicated herself to had gone unfinished. The front door opened and closed. Footsteps approached the office. "Elijah?" Lena called. "In here," he answered, not taking his eyes off the screen. Lena entered, carrying coffee and a legal folder. She stopped when she saw the state of the room and Elijah's face. "You found something," she said. It wasn't a question. "Everything." Elijah gestured at the scattered evidence. Naomi had almost the entire picture. Captain Vance coordinating with code enforcement. Delaney feeding addresses to both. Developer representatives making offers after police visits. He played her fragments of the recordings. Lena set the coffee down and examined the files with practiced eyes. "This establishes the pattern we suspected," she said. "But we need more recent evidence that's admissible in court. We have Gloria's porch video." "That's a start," Lena nodded. "I can file for an emergency injunction based on harassment and due process violations. The 30-day condemnation window Delaney pushed through violates state law on reasonable remediation periods." Elijah stood up and walked to the window. Outside, the neighborhood was waking up. An elderly man shuffled to get his newspaper. A young mother hurried children toward a waiting school bus. "They thought no one would fight for this place," he said quietly. "They didn't count on you," Lena replied. "They didn't count on Naomi." Elijah turned back to the desk. "She left us the map. We just need to follow it." He spread out Naomi's marked map of Mercy Street. Red circles identified targeted homes. Yellow highlighted investor purchases. Blue marked properties with multiple code violations. The pattern was unmistakable. A systematic clearing of the neighborhood from east to west. Gloria's home sat in the center of the remaining red circles. Elijah placed his hand on the map, over the neighborhood where he'd grown up, where Naomi had fought for justice, where Gloria still refused to leave. "We release the porch footage today," he decided. "File the injunction immediately. Make it public before they can bury it." Lena nodded, already reaching for her phone. Elijah looked once more at Naomi's handwriting across the top of the map. "They can't take what isn't for sale." His fingers traced the words as he made a silent promise to his wife. "I'll finish what you started." That afternoon, Lena filed the emergency injunction at the county courthouse, while Elijah uploaded the edited footage of Rusk threatening Gloria to social media. The video showed Rusk on Gloria's porch, his face clear in the porch light's glow. "You should take the offer before the city takes the house." Rusk's voice rang clearly through the speaker. Gloria's response was just as clear. "This home is not for sale." Then came the moment when Rusk spotted the camera and smashed it with his flashlight. Elijah carefully edited out any personal identifying information for Gloria's safety, but left the address visible enough that city officials would know exactly which property was involved. He tagged local news stations, civil rights organizations, and the mayor's office. Within an hour, the video had been shared thousands of times. By mid-afternoon, 3 local news stations had run segments on it. By evening, the regularly scheduled city council meeting had become standing room only, with residents from Mercy Street filling every available space. "I've never seen it like this," Albert Keene whispered to Elijah as they squeezed into seats near the front. The 74-year-old widower's hands trembled slightly as he clutched a folder containing his violation notices. "That's the point," Elijah replied. "They never wanted us all in one room." Councilwoman Delaney sat at the center of the long desk at the front, her usually composed face tight with strain. Captain Vance stood near the side door, arms crossed, watching the crowd with careful eyes. When public comment opened, Gloria was the first to the microphone. She stood straight, despite her recent hospital stay, her voice clear and strong. "My name is Gloria Bellamy. I changed bandages at County Hospital for 40 years. I paid my taxes on time for 53 years. I buried my husband in this city." She paused, eyes sweeping the council. "And I will not be bullied out of my own home by men hiding behind paperwork." The room erupted in applause. Delaney tapped her gavel ineffectively. One by one, residents approached the microphone. Mavis Rowe presented her teaching credentials alongside her code violations. Albert shakily held up photos of his children growing up in the house he was now told needed $14,000 in repairs. "Where am I supposed to get that kind of money?" he asked, his voice cracking. "And why wasn't it a problem last year?" or the year before. With each testimony, Delaney's composure crumbled further. Twice she tried to limit comment time. Twice the crowd shouted her down. Finally, Captain Vance approached the podium. The room quieted. In light of the video circulating online, Officer Rusk has been placed on administrative leave pending a full departmental review, he announced, his voice professionally measured. The department takes allegations of misconduct seriously. Murmurs spread through the crowd. Vance continued, "We will cooperate fully with any investigation into these complaints." His words were perfect, Elijah noted. Too perfect. Practiced. The captain's eyes never connected with anyone in the audience. Near the end of the meeting, a clerk approached the council with a message. Delaney read it silently, her face falling. "I've just been informed," she said stiffly, "that Judge Wilson has granted a temporary stay on all code enforcement condemnation actions in the Mercy Street district for 1 week, pending review." The crowd erupted. People hugged, cried, clasped hands. Albert's shoulders sagged with relief. Outside City Hall, the mood turned celebratory. Neighbors who had lived in fear for months embraced on the steps. Local news cameras captured the jubilant scene. "We did it," Gloria said, squeezing Elijah's arm. "We really did it." Elijah smiled, but he felt Lena's eyes on him. "This is only temporary," she warned quietly, standing slightly apart from the celebration. 1 week doesn't solve the underlying problem, and cornered people often become most dangerous. "I know," Elijah replied, "but they needed this moment." As the crowd began to disperse, Gloria looked tired. Her brief hospital stay had taken more out of her than she would admit. "Let me drive you home," Elijah offered. She nodded gratefully. As they pulled away from City Hall in the Ferrari, Gloria closed her eyes, finally allowing herself to relax. "Naomi would be proud of you," she murmured. Elijah felt a tightness in his chest at the mention of his wife's name. "She'd be proud of all of us." They drove in comfortable silence through the darkening streets. As they turned onto Mercy Street, Gloria suddenly sat up straight. "Elijah, look," she said, pointing ahead. In the distance, against the night sky, a column of black smoke rose thick and menacing. "That's coming from the community center," Elijah said, pressing down on the accelerator. The Ferrari surged forward as both of them watched the smoke climb higher into the evening air. The Ferrari screeched to a halt, a block from the community center. Red and blue lights flashed across Mercy Street as fire trucks blocked the road ahead. Elijah and Gloria jumped out, rushing toward the chaos on foot. Thick black smoke billowed from the rear of the building. Bright orange flames licked at the windows of what Elijah knew was the Foundation office, where they'd stored resident complaint files and Naomi's research. "No, no, no," Gloria whispered, her hand covering her mouth. Residents from all over the neighborhood stood behind police tape, watching in horror as firefighters battled the blaze. Mavis Rowe clutched Albert Keene's arm, both their faces illuminated by the dancing flames. Elijah ducked under the tape, Gloria following close behind. "Sir, you can't go past here," a firefighter shouted. "That's my building," Elijah said, his voice tight with urgency. "Is everyone out?" "Was anyone inside?" "Building was empty when we arrived," the firefighter confirmed. "We've got it contained to the back section, but there's heavy damage to the rear office." Elijah's stomach knotted. The rear office, where all their documentation was stored, the files, the evidence, Naomi's research. "This ain't no accident," someone muttered in the crowd. A news van pulled up, its bright lights sweeping over the scene. A reporter Elijah recognized, the same one who'd written the hit piece against him, was already thrusting a microphone toward a man in a city inspector's jacket. "Initial assessment?" the reporter asked. The inspector, a thin man with a clipboard, didn't hesitate. "Appears to be electrical in nature." Substandard wiring in the office area. Possibly overloaded circuits from recent renovations. Elijah froze. The foundation had done no electrical work. The building systems had been professionally updated and inspected just after purchase. "Are you suggesting negligence by the building's owner?" the reporter pressed. "Can't rule it out," the inspector said, glancing directly at Elijah, "especially given the rushed nature of the recent work." The camera swung toward Elijah, capturing his shock and anger. "That's a lie," Elijah said loudly. "There was no recent electrical work. The building was fully certified." Gloria's sudden gasp cut him off. She swayed beside him, clutching her chest. "Gloria?" Elijah turned, catching her as her knees buckled. "Can't breathe right," she managed, her face contorted in pain. "We need help," Elijah shouted, lowering her gently to the ground. "Someone call an ambulance." Within minutes, paramedics pushed through the crowd. They worked quickly, checking Gloria's vitals, administering oxygen, and lifting her onto a stretcher. "BP's elevated, possible cardiac event," one paramedic said to another. "Let's move." "I'm coming with her," Elijah insisted, following them to the ambulance. He looked back at the burning building, then spotted Lena pushing through the crowd. "Lena, Gloria's going to the hospital. Stay here. Find out everything you can about this fire," he called out. "Don't let them touch anything until we have our own inspector." Lena nodded, already pulling out her phone as she approached the fire chief. The ambulance ride was a blur of sirens and Gloria's labored breathing. Elijah held her hand, whispering reassurances he wasn't sure he believed. At Memorial Hospital, doctors whisked Gloria away for tests, while Elijah paced the waiting room, making calls. First to Gloria's daughter in Atlanta, then to the Foundation's lawyers, demanding their own fire investigator. An hour later, a doctor informed him Gloria was stable. Not a heart attack, but stress-induced cardiac symptoms they needed to monitor overnight. "She's asking for you," the doctor added. Elijah followed him down the sterile hallway, pausing at the sound of a familiar voice. Rough night for the neighborhood hero. Officer Rusk leaned against the wall near the nurse's station, arms crossed. Despite being on administrative leave, he wore his uniform. "What are you doing here?" Elijah demanded, keeping his voice low. "Checking on a citizen in distress," Rusk said with a smirk. "That's my job, after all." "You're supposed to be on leave." Rusk shrugged. "Paperwork's slow. Besides, when I heard Ms. Bellamy was brought in, I wanted to make sure she was all right. Being a public servant and all." He stepped closer to Elijah, dropping his voice. "You know, all this could have been avoided if you'd just kept driving in your shiny car. Not everyone's cut out for saving the world." Something snapped inside Elijah. His hand shot out, grabbing Rusk's collar and pushing him against the wall. The officer's eyes widened with shock, then narrowed with satisfaction. "That's what I was hoping for," Rusk whispered. "Assaulting an officer in a hospital. That'll play well." "Elijah, stop!" Lena's voice cut through the tension. She strode down the hallway, her heels clicking sharply against the linoleum. "Let him go. Now." Elijah released Rusk's collar, stepping back as his hands trembled with rage. "Officer Rusk," Lena said coldly, "I suggest you leave immediately, unless you'd like me to file a harassment complaint with the State Licensing Board. Your administrative leave status makes your presence here highly questionable." Rusk straightened his uniform, the smirk never leaving his face. "Just checking on a community member." He walked backward a few steps. "Give Ms. Bellamy my regards. Hope she feels better soon." With a mock salute, he disappeared around the corner. Lena grabbed Elijah's arm. "The fire chief wouldn't commit to anything, but I've got our own investigator coming first thing tomorrow. Don't give Rusk what he wants." Elijah nodded, his jaw tight. Together they entered Gloria's room. Gloria lay small against the white sheets, an oxygen tube in her nose and monitors beeping beside her. She opened her eyes as they approached. "They burned it all, didn't they?" she asked weakly. "Not everything," Lena said. "The fire was contained to the back office." Gloria's hand shot out, grasping Elijah's with surprising strength. Her eyes were clear and fierce despite her condition. "Don't you dare get polite now," she whispered. Smoke hung in the air like a ghost. Elijah stood in the doorway of his office at the community center, staring at the destruction. Water from fire hoses pooled on the floor, turning documents into soggy pulp. The acrid smell burned his nostrils. "We shouldn't stay long," Lena said, flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. "The structure hasn't been cleared yet." Elijah nodded, but stepped inside anyway. The fire had gutted the back office where they'd stored resident testimonies and violation notices. Shelves had collapsed. File boxes lay in charred heaps. "This wasn't an accident," he said quietly. "I know." Lena's voice was tight. "But we need proof, not just suspicion." Elijah moved toward a metal filing cabinet that had partially protected some items beneath it. He crouched down, ignoring the water soaking into his pant legs, and pulled out a small lockbox. It was dented, but intact. "Naomi's recorder," he whispered. She kept it in a fireproof case. His hands trembled as he turned the small key still attached to his keyring. The metal box opened with a click, revealing a digital recorder and several memory cards sealed in plastic. "Is it damaged?" Lena asked, moving closer. Elijah pressed the power button. A small green light flickered on. "It works." Something like hope flickered in his chest. "Let's get out of here." They drove to Elijah's townhouse in silence, both too exhausted for conversation. The digital clock on the dashboard read 2:17 a.m. Gloria was stable, but would remain hospitalized for observation. The doctors had warned that stress could trigger another cardiac event. Inside his living room, Elijah connected the recorder to his laptop, while Lena made strong coffee. The device contained dozens of audio files, each meticulously labeled with dates and names. "She was always more organized than me," Elijah said softly as the files loaded. Lena placed a steaming mug beside him. Naomi built cases like fortresses. Nothing left to chance. They played the first recording. Naomi's voice filled the room. Calm, precise, professional. Elijah closed his eyes for a moment, letting the familiar cadence wash over him. "Interview with Albert Keene, March 12th, Naomi's voice said. "Mr. Keene, can you describe when you first received code violation notices?" An elderly man's voice responded, explaining how citations began 2 weeks after refusing an investor's offer. 3 days after the citation, Officer Rusk had knocked on his door at 9:30 p.m., claiming a neighbor reported suspicious activity. File after file revealed the same pattern. Minor violations followed refusals to sell. Police visits increased pressure. Offers always decreased after citations. "Listen to this one," Lena said, clicking a file labeled Source X, Parks Department. A nervous man explained how certain addresses were flagged for priority enforcement after development planning meetings. Captain Vance received these lists directly from Councilwoman Delaney's office. "Jesus," Elijah muttered. The most damning recording came at 4:38 a.m. A developer's assistant caught on tape explaining how Officer Rusk received payments through a security consulting arrangement for special attention to certain properties. "This is enough for the state attorney general," Lena said, rubbing her eyes. Elijah nodded, but exhaustion had settled into his bones. "If they don't burn this evidence, too." Lena sat up suddenly. "Wait. The last time I saw Naomi, she mentioned creating backups." She pulled out her phone, scrolling through her calendar. "We met for coffee 2 weeks before the accident. She said she was mailing me something for safekeeping." "Did she?" "I think so. A package arrived after—" Lena paused. "After the funeral, I couldn't bring myself to open anything related to her cases then. It should be in our archived storage. Without another word, they drove to Lena's office downtown. The security guard recognized her and let them in despite the hour. In the basement file room, Lena pulled out a banker's box labeled Grant N. Personal. Inside was a sealed manila envelope with Lena's name written in Naomi's neat handwriting. Lena sliced it open with a letter opener. "Oh, Naomi," she whispered. The package contained multiple USB drives, printed email threads between Delaney and developers, call logs showing Vance's direct line contacting investors after enforcement actions, and a detailed timeline connecting code violations to police visits and lowered offers. Elijah spread the documents across the conference table as pink light began filtering through the windows. Dawn had arrived. "This isn't just random corruption," Lena said, organizing papers into evidence categories. "This is systematic displacement using public institutions as weapons." She gathered the most critical documents into her briefcase and faced Elijah. "We don't have a complaint anymore," she said firmly. "We have a case." 2 days passed in a blur of depositions, affidavits, and hospital visits. Elijah spent mornings with state investigators, afternoons checking on Gloria's recovery, and evenings updating Mercy Street residents. Lena barely slept, preparing legal filings that would protect the neighborhood long after the immediate crisis ended. By Wednesday morning, Elijah was ready. He stood before the mirror adjusting the same green suit he'd worn when Rusk arrested him. The color reminded him of Naomi, her favorite, and the promise he'd made at her funeral to protect what she valued. Today, he would keep that promise. "You sure about this location?" Lena asked as she gathered files. "The community center is still cordoned off as a fire scene." "That's exactly why it needs to happen there," Elijah replied. "Let them see what they tried to destroy." Yellow caution tape fluttered around the damaged building when Elijah pulled the red Ferrari to the curb at exactly 10 a.m. Cameras clicked as he stepped out, the visual deliberately mirroring the day of his arrest. Folding chairs had been arranged in a half circle facing a small podium. Behind it stood a portable speaker system and a projection screen. Residents filed in first, followed by local reporters. Gloria had insisted on attending despite her doctor's objections. Mr. Keene pushed her wheelchair to the front row. The neighborhood formed a protective circle around her. "This meeting isn't what they think it is," Lena whispered to Elijah as Captain Vance arrived with 2 uniformed officers. "They believe we're negotiating surrender terms." Councilwoman Delaney approached with an aide, her smile tight and professional. She nodded to Elijah as though they were colleagues on equal footing. "Mr. Grant," she said loudly enough for nearby reporters to hear, "I'm pleased we can discuss reasonable accommodations for the neighborhood while still moving forward with necessary improvements." Elijah didn't answer. His eyes had locked on a figure at the edge of the gathering. Officer Rusk, in civilian clothes, but unmistakable with his squared shoulders and contemptuous smirk. Despite administrative leave, he'd come to watch what he assumed would be Elijah's capitulation. The murmuring crowd quieted as Elijah approached the podium. Behind him, Lena connected her laptop to the projector, while an assistant attorney general from the state's Civil Rights Division took position near the side entrance. 3 days ago, I stood in handcuffs beside my car, while Officer Rusk told me, "If that's your Ferrari, I'll quit," Elijah began, his voice steady and clear. "Today, I return in the same car, wearing the same suit, to tell this neighborhood the truth about why that happened." Captain Vance shifted uncomfortably. Delaney's smile had vanished. "Officer Rusk didn't stop me because my car looked suspicious," Elijah continued. "He stopped me because I was parked outside Gloria Bellamy's house, a house on what they call the list." Rusk pushed forward through the crowd. "You think having money makes you special?" he called out. You're just playing hero for a neighborhood you abandoned years ago. The crowd parted as Rusk approached the front, exactly as Elijah had anticipated. No, Elijah replied calmly. It needed honest men in uniform. Since it didn't get them, it got me instead. Rusk stepped closer, jaw tight. You think money makes you untouchable? No, Elijah said, his voice dropping lower. Evidence does. He nodded to Lena, who pressed play. Suddenly, Naomi's clear voice filled the air. October 15th. Interview with Parks Department employee regarding priority enforcement properties. The recording continued, revealing how addresses were flagged after development meetings. Then came the developer's assistant describing Rusk's payments. Finally, the damning call logs between Vance's direct line and investors. The crowd fell silent. Rusk's face drained of color. From the back, Officer Nathaniel Brooks stepped forward in full uniform. The state attorney general's office had arranged his whistleblower protection the previous evening. Officer Rusk falsified the arrest report for Mr. Grant, Brooks stated clearly. He claimed Mr. Grant was aggressive and non-compliant, which was a lie. Captain Vance reviewed and approved that report, knowing it was false. And both of them knew about the pressure property list targeting Ms. Bellamy and other longtime residents. Councilwoman Delaney turned to leave, but found her path blocked by two state investigators. Rusk lunged toward the podium, but stopped when the Assistant Attorney General called out, "Officer Dale Rusk, please remain where you are." More state investigators moved through the stunned crowd, converging on Vance, who stood frozen in place. Gloria's voice rose above the growing commotion. "You laughed at the wrong man," she called to Rusk. "But worse than that, you picked on the wrong neighborhood." The residents of Mercy Street, so long intimidated into silence, began to applaud. Tentatively at first, then with growing confidence as they watched Rusk, Vance, and Delaney surrounded by investigators. Justice, so long delayed, had finally arrived on Mercy Street. Rusk's face contorted with fury as he backed away from the podium. His eyes darted left and right, searching for an escape route through the crowd. When he turned to leave, two state investigators stepped directly into his path. "Officer Dale Rusk," the lead investigator announced, loud enough for everyone to hear, "you are under arrest for falsifying official police reports, witness intimidation, evidence tampering, and corruption charges related to your private security arrangements." The crowd fell silent as an investigator pulled out handcuffs. The metallic click echoed across the gathering as they secured Rusk's wrists behind his back. The same humiliation he had inflicted on Elijah weeks earlier now returned to him in front of the entire neighborhood. "This is ridiculous," Rusk sputtered, his face reddening. "You can't believe these people over a police officer." "We believe evidence, Officer Rusk," the investigator replied calmly, "and we have plenty." Captain Vance tried to maintain his composure, straightening his uniform as investigators approached him. His practiced smile disappeared when Lena stepped forward with a folder. "Captain Harold Vance," Lena said, her voice steady and clear, "these are copies of call logs between your direct line and Parkview developers. And these," she held up printed emails, "show you coordinating enforcement priorities with Councilwoman Delaney's office, targeting specific homeowners who refused buyout offers." Vance's professional mask crumbled. "This is being taken completely out of context," he protested, as investigators escorted him toward a waiting vehicle. Unlike Rusk, they hadn't handcuffed him, but his career was equally finished. Councilwoman Delaney attempted to slip away during the commotion, but a process server intercepted her at the edge of the crowd. "Councilwoman Nora Delaney," the server announced formally, "you are hereby served with notice of a civil action for conspiracy to violate civil rights." Cameras flashed as the papers were placed in her trembling hands. The neighborhood residents, who had once feared these powerful figures, now watched them fall one by one. Elijah stood beside Gloria's wheelchair, her hand gripping his tightly as the arrests unfolded. "This isn't about revenge," he told the gathered reporters. "This is about protecting people's homes and their dignity." The state attorney general's representative approached Elijah. "Mr. Grant, I want to inform you personally that all charges related to your arrest have been formally dismissed and expunged from your record, and the redevelopment vote has been suspended pending our full investigation." A cheer went up from the residents. Albert Keene waved his violation notice in the air. "What about these? What about our homes?" "All targeted code enforcement actions are frozen," the representative confirmed, "and a state-level review of the entire inspection process will begin immediately." Gloria looked up at Elijah, tears in her eyes. "Naomi would be proud," she whispered. 6 weeks later, the sun shone brightly on the newly rebuilt community center. A large banner hung across the front. "Grand Opening, Naomi Grant Senior Justice Center." Where charred beams had once stood, fresh paint gleamed. The crowd gathered for the ribbon cutting was twice the size of the one that had witnessed the arrests. Local television crews positioned their cameras as Gloria, fully recovered from her hospital stay, rolled forward in her wheelchair with a large pair of scissors. "This center," Gloria announced to applause, "will make sure what happened to us never happens to anyone else." She cut the ribbon with a flourish, as the crowd erupted in cheers. Inside, the renovated building housed offices for legal clinics, home repair grant administration, property tax counseling, and a dedicated hotline for reporting police misconduct. Photos of Mercy Street's history lined the walls, and in the main meeting room hung a portrait of Naomi Grant, smiling and determined. Elijah walked through the center, stopping to shake hands with residents. The past weeks had brought dramatic changes. Delaney had resigned under mounting pressure. A special election was scheduled. The police department had begun an outside investigation of its practices. Brooks had been reinstated and was becoming a key witness in the ongoing corruption case. After the ceremony, Elijah stepped outside into the afternoon sunlight. He walked to the curb where the red Ferrari waited, the same spot where Rusk had once handcuffed him. This time there were no flashing lights, no accusations, no cuffs, just neighbors waving and smiling. A small boy, about 8 years old, approached hesitantly. "Mister," he said, pointing at the Ferrari, "is that really your car?" Elijah knelt to the child's level. "Yes, it is." The boy's eyes widened. "Can people like us have cars like that?" Elijah placed a gentle hand on the boy's shoulder. "People like us can own the car, the street, the building, the truth, and the future," he said softly. "Don't let anybody laugh you out of what's yours." Across the street, Gloria watched from the center's doorway, her eyes glistening with pride as she witnessed Elijah pass this message to the next generation. The neighborhood that had once been marked for destruction now stood as a monument to justice, resilience, and hope. If you enjoyed the story, leave a like to support my channel and subscribe so that you do not miss out on the next one. On the screen, I have picked 2 special stories just for you. Have a wonderful day.